Hey, what's going on, guys? Today I want to talk to you about the Canon 135mm f2 lens. This lens has been around for almost 20 years without an update, and it's considered by many to be one of the sharpest, if not the sharpest lens Canon has ever made. But yet it's overlooked by a lot of photographers. Now, if you look around at reviews on this lens, it is very highly rated by people who use it, but it's still overlooked by a lot of people. And there's a couple of reasons why I think people don't appreciate this lens who've never used it. One is it's not a zoom lens, so it's not versatile. So a lot of beginners don't really understand the benefits of prime lenses because they simply haven't used them. One of the other issues with this lens is the focal length. At 135mm, it's kind of an awkward focal length. It's a little bit on the long end for things like street photography, and depending on your studio setup for indoor photography, for indoor portraits, it might be a little bit on the long end. Now, for this lens, even though it's a telephoto lens, it's on the short end of being a telephoto lens. So it's kind of in this awkward focal length where a lot of people don't understand what uses it would have. The other thing is everybody wants a fast aperture lens, and they sit there and think, well, at f2, it's not going to be as fast as an f1.4 or even an f1.2 lens. And so I think that it gets overlooked by that. But the thing is you got to remember your depth of field isn't just controlled by your aperture, it's also controlled by your focal length and, of course, your distance to the subject. Even though this is an f2 lens, at 135mm, you can get some razor thin depth of field. Take a look at this picture of this Lego minifigure. Now, this is not a macro lens, so you can't get really close to your subject. But I snapped this shot, and this is on my kitchen table, and the background is a couple of textbooks, and they're about 2.5 feet behind the minifigure, and it's out of focus. But take a look at the gun in the figure's left hand. Think of how small a Lego minifigure is, and the gun is already out of focus at about 1 centimeter away from the focus point. So you can get some razor thin depth of field. Here's another picture that I shot on my kitchen table just messing around of a piece of bubble gum. And you can see how the center of the piece of gum is in focus, but the wrappers on the end of it are out of focus. Now, one of the things that I saw looking around on the forums and blogs just to see what other people said was I saw a handful of people complaining that they felt like the autofocus on this lens missed. I don't think that the autofocus on this lens misses. I think what the issue is a lot of people just are not used to shooting at such a shallow depth of field. That picture of that piece of gum, it took me 5 tries to get the focus point in the center. It kept wanting to go to one end of the wrapper or the other. And it wasn't a lens error, it was a photographer error. I was shooting it handheld, and it doesn't take very much when you're shooting at such a shallow depth of field to miss. Here's another image that I shot outdoors. I was trying to focus on the eyes like all photographers do, and it looked great on the back of the camera, but you can see that the focus point is on Samantha's nose and not her eyes. I just missed, and the reason why I missed was because I used a focus and recompose shooting style, and whenever you focus and you recompose, it's very easy when you're using an extremely shallow depth of field to move that focus point just slightly and miss with your depth of field. So I don't think that it's a lens issue with people missing on the autofocus. I think it's just the practicalities of shooting with such a thin depth of field. I make that mistake a lot when I try to shoot with an extremely shallow depth of field, and I'm sure other people do as well. It's just something to be aware of. Now, as I mentioned, this lens is kind of an awkward focal length. For me, whenever I shoot indoors at my studio, it's too long for me to really shoot comfortably indoors. I'm backed up all the way to the wall, and it's just uncomfortable because I just don't have enough space. Now, for outdoor portraits, I think that it's a great focal length, and it helps you to create some amazing separation between your subject and your background, and the bokeh this creates is just beautiful. Now, that's on a full frame camera. If you're shooting on a crop sensor camera, you have to remember this 135mm becomes right around just under 200mm on a crop sensor camera body. And that's going to be pretty long, especially for indoor shooting situations. Now, what I really love this lens for, even more than shooting portraits, is I like this lens for shooting indoor sports. Sports like volleyball, basketball, and wrestling. At f2, it gives me a full stop of light more than I get with my f2.8 telephoto lenses. I can drop my ISO from, let's say, 6400 all the way down to 3200 and keep the same shutter speed and get way cleaner images. Or if I need to, I can increase the shutter speed and leave the ISO the same. Now, because this is a prime lens and not a zoom lens, it can be a little frustrating to use for sports shooting, because in sports the action moves closer and it gets further away from you, and when you're stuck with one focal length, that can be a problem. But because this lens is so sharp and the image quality is so great, I don't mind if the subjects are a little bit further away than I would like. I can shoot with this because I don't mind cropping, because the image quality is so great coming out of this lens. Now, on the opposite end, when the action gets too close, it is a little bit frustrating, because sometimes you just don't have time or the room to back up to be able to get the shot. But that's something I'm willing to deal with, because the images that I do get with this lens are just phenomenal. It creates great separation between the subject and the background. The images are super sharp, and it does such a great job in low light. One of the other things that I love about this lens for shooting sports is this lens autofocuses blazingly fast. Now, it does have a focus limiter switch here from 0.9 meters to 1.6 meters. To be honest with you, I don't use it because it just focuses so incredibly fast anyways. I just leave it set to the full range all the time. Now, one of the complaints that I have heard people make about this lens is the lack of image stabilization, and that is a legitimate concern. At 135 millimeters, you have to remember you have to keep your shutter speed above your focal length in order to prevent camera shake. So that probably means you're going to be shooting at 1/60th of a second in order to avoid camera shake in your images. And that's not an incredibly fast shutter speed, but in low light situations that could be a little bit of a problem, and image stabilization would be a benefit. Now, when you're shooting sports, it's a non-issue, because 1/60th of a second is just too slow to shoot sports and you're going to get motion blur anyways. But if you were shooting indoor situations like, let's say, a play or something like that, where there's not a lot of movement and you wanted to really lower your shutter speed and keep your ISO down, it would be beneficial. But at f2, you are able to let a lot of light in, and you can shoot in some very low lit situations. So even though this lens is almost 20 years old and it'll set you back about $1,000, maybe a little bit less right now, I really like this lens, especially for indoor sports. Granted, it's not a very versatile lens because of its focal length, but if you shoot a lot of indoor events, things like school plays, sports, I really think this is a great lens. If all you're going to get it for is a portrait lens, it will do an outstanding job, but there are probably more versatile lenses out there that you might want to consider. Something like maybe an 85-1.4 lens that would cost you less, and it would probably give you a little bit more functionality than this lens. But all in all, I think this is a great lens, and you guys can take a look at the sample images. Tell me what you think. If you guys have any questions, leave me a comment below. Thanks for watching. Have a great day.